Good morning, everyone who's joining us in person and also online. Welcome to the 2024 Mina Swaminathan Media Fellowship Awards. This is an event that is in honor of Mina Swaminathan, who has spent her whole life and career in building gender-inclusive development interventions, both in education and in development. I first invite Dr. Rangalakshmi to set the context for this award, and then we'll move slowly through this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Anamika. Good morning to everyone, and wishing you a happy new year. And this is the first event in the foundation in this new year, 2025. And this year is a special year for us. We are celebrating centenary year of Professor Swaminathan for his contribution and different spheres, not only in agriculture, at the national as well as the global level, setting the context. And this fellowship is very specific to us, commemorating the contributions of Mrs. Mina Swaminathan, who has been an instrumental in bringing gender into the forefront in agriculture. And from the foundation side, since 1992, we have been working on gender, and it is in our mandate itself, it is included as a pro-women, as a kind of a first strategy to bring gender equality in all our interventions. And this particular fellowship is, started in 2021, basically to provide an opportunity for the young journalist to have a orientation on science and society, how different agriculture interventions and different farming communities and associated stakeholders have been facing several issues or have been developing innovations to overcome it. And basically, as a kind of a fellowship, they are bringing up the stories from the field, and it is getting, disseminated to different kind of stakeholders. And as a young media fellows, they are getting into the deeper issues of the community in diverse settings, basically from the interventions of foundations, field sites, regional centers. They are associated right now for the last 3 years. But some of the fellows in between also, they had an opportunity to see the issues which are very, critical at that point of time. So this fellowship, again, three fellows we used to select every year. One from Tamil Nadu, another one Kerala, then Orissa. So 3 fellows we are supporting in the process. Yearly once we are, having this fellowship. And this fellowship process we have been following from the selection to mentoring, as well as writing, guiding them in writing, understanding the issues, then also in the dissemination part of it. So it is a kind of a unique fellowship, and right now we are starting with 3, but in coming years, based on the support we are getting, definitely we will be expanding it to few more fellows as well as few more areas where we can have a kind of a deeper insights from the field. So with that, I will hand over to Anamika to start the session. Thank you.
So before I invite the stars of the day, I'd like to invite our expert commentators. Let me first invite P. Sainath. P. Sainath is the founder editor of the People's Archive of Rural India. PARI, the remarkable living archive on rural India, has been documenting and reporting stories on the various social, economic, and political issues that affect the everyday lives of diverse peoples in rural India. Sainath has been the former Rural Affairs Editor of the Hindu and the recipient of the World Media Summit Global Award for Excellence 2014 in Public Welfare Reporting. He was the first reporter in the world to win Amnesty International's Global Award for Human Rights Journalism in its inaugural year in 2000. I would request you to please, he's already online, so welcome, sir. Our next commentator for today is Aparna Karthikeyan, who is an author, independent journalist, and senior fellow of People's Archive of Rural India. Her stories on disappearing livelihoods and painful transformations in rural Tamil Nadu have been influential in bringing the voices of the unheard and invisible into the center stage. For any serious researcher interested in rural issues in Tamil Nadu, her work is nothing less than a repository of great knowledge. Last but not the least, I'd like to invite Professor Nitya Rao, who is a professor of gender and development in the University of East Anglia. Her teaching and research interests include exploring the gendered changes in land and migration patterns amongst marginalized rural communities with a view to achieving livelihood, food, and nutrition security, especially in the context of climatic variability and economic precarity. She's one of the most influential feminist scholars of our contemporary times, and as a gender scholar myself, I've been reading her work for I don't know how long. Thank you for being here. She's published extensively on themes in national and international peer-reviewed journals and books, while most of her research is located in South Asia and especially India. She's also worked on the African region quite extensively. She's currently a member of the Board of Trustee of the MSSRF. Can I request Professor Nitya and Aparna to take this? So now next is the the introduction of the Media Fellows of 2024. I invite Ms. Indu Gunashekar, who has built her career in journalism, specializing at in-depth coverage of gender-related issues, including stories on gender and labor and issues surrounding menstruation. At present, she is a senior sub-editor with Hindu Tamil Tisai based in Chennai. Indu demonstrates a strong passion and commitment to gender issues through her work and focuses on extending the boundaries of mainstream journalism. Her work has contributed to a more comprehensive understanding of gender issues and has fostered meaningful dialogue as well as awareness among readers. In 2021, Indu received the Ladli Media Fellowship for her work in gender-related storytelling. Our second fellow for today is Mr. Shafiq Tamarasheri, who is a Kochi-based journalist who primarily writes on topics related to land rights, human rights, minority rights, and also on the environment. Before taking on his current role as senior news editor at Reporter TV's digital division, he served as a special correspondent for Dool News and the principal correspondent for True Copy Think. Shafiq is 2020 Ladli Media Fellowship grantee and the Prajna Trust Chennai awardee for the Rajaram Media Fellowship also in 2021. Ms. Shatarupa Samantaraya from Orissa is our third fellow for 2024. Her writings focus on rural employment and entrepreneurship, rural development and migration, gender issues and climate change. She is a special correspondent with Argus News and was awarded the National Ladli Media Award in 2022 for her story on Danteshwari fighters. One of Shatarupa's stories, Mali Sahira Mola Fula, broadcast on ETV Bharat, was recognized as the 2021 Ladli Media Awards as for her work. She has also received the Best Journalist by Odisha Media Awards and UNICEF Fellowship. Can I first invite Indu to present her work that she's done as part of the fellowship?
Good morning to everyone. சாய்நாத் சார் உட்பட மிகப்பெரிய ஆளுமைகளுக்கு மத்தியில் என்னுடைய ப்ரெசன்டேஷன் பண்ணுறது எனக்கு ரொம்ப மகிழ்ச்சியாக இருக்குது. மீனா சுவாமிநாதன் மீடியா ஃபெல்லோஷிப் 2024 கீழே எங்களுக்கு கொடுக்கப்பட்ட தலைப்பு வந்து ஜெண்டர் இஷ்யூஸ் இன் வாட்டர் ஸ்கேர்சிட்டி இன் இந்தியா. அதாவது இந்தியாவில் தண்ணீர் தட்டுப்பாடு சார்ந்து நிலவும் பாலின பாகுபாடு. இதன் அடிப்படையில் என்னுடைய முதல் கட்டுரை வந்து ராமநாதபுரம் மாவட்டம் சார்ந்ததாக இருந்தது. ராமநாதபுரம் மாவட்டத்தில் தாங்கா அப்படிங்கிற மழைநீர் சேகரிப்பு திட்டம் எப்படி வந்தது அப்படின்றத என்னோட முதல் கட்டுரையில் நான் பதிவு பண்ணியிருந்தேன். அதற்காக MSRF சீனியர் சயின்டிஸ்ட் செல்வன் முகிலன் சாரோட நான் ராமநாதபுரத்தில் இருக்க கடலோர மாவட்டங்களில் உண்டான மேல சேத்தனேந்தல் அப்படின்ற கிராமத்துக்கு பயணப்பட்டிருந்தேன். அங்கே அந்த கிராமத்துக்கு உள்ளே இறங்கினதே காலையில் நாங்கள் பார்த்த காட்சிகள் வந்து பார்த்திங்கன்னா, குடங்களோட பெண்கள் வந்து ஆங்காங்கே எல்லா இடங்களிலுமே குடங்களோட தான் காலையிலேயே வந்து பெண்கள் நின்றுட்டு இருந்தாங்க. கிட்டத்தட்ட அந்த 4 கிராமங்களுக்கு நான் பயணப்பட்டேன். திருப்புல்லானி, பெரியகுளம், மேல சேத்தனேந்தல் உட்பட ஒரு 5 கிராமங்களுக்கு பயணப்பட்டு அங்கே எல்லா இடங்கள்லையுமே குடங்களோட தான் பெண்கள் வந்து நின்றுட்டு இருந்தாங்க. கிட்டத்தட்ட மதியம் வரை நான் பல பெண்களோட பேசிட்டு வந்தேன். மதியம் வரமே அங்கங்கே குடங்களோட பெண்கள் நின்றுட்டு இருந்தாங்க. அந்த அளவுக்கு அவங்களுக்கு வந்து தண்ணீர் தேவை இருக்குது. மாலை நேரங்களில் கூட சில பேர் வந்து அந்த ஊரணி, கண்மாய் அந்த இடத்துல இன்னும் கூட வந்து தண்ணீருக்காக ஒரு நாள் முழுக்க நிற்க வேண்டிய நிலை தான் அங்கே இருக்குது. அது அங்கே இருக்க பெண்களோட ஒரு நாள் வந்து தண்ணீர் சார்ந்து தான் ஏங்கிட்டு இருந்தது அப்படின்றது அந்த முதல் நாளே என்னால் அந்த கலை யதார்த்தத்தை வந்து உணர்ந்து கொள்ள முடிஞ்சது. அங்கே இருக்கிற முக்கியமான இஷ்யூஸ் வந்து பார்த்தீங்கன்னா வாட்டர் சலைனிட்டி. அதாவது ராமநாதபுரம் மாவட்டத்தில் உள்ள கடலோர மாவட்டங்களில் வந்து அங்கே இருக்கிற கடல் நீர் வந்து நிலத்தடி நீரில் கலந்துருது. அதனால் அவங்களுக்கு வந்து குடிநீரை வந்து அவங்க அவங்களோட பயன்பாட்டுக்கு பயன்படுத்த முடியலை. அப்படி பயன்படுத்தினாலுமே அவங்களுக்கு வந்து உடல்நல பாதிப்புகள், ரேஷஸ், காலரா இந்த மாதிரியான இஷ்யூஸ்னால அவங்க வந்து பாதிக்கப்படுறாங்க. அதுவும் இல்லாமல் வந்து தண்ணீரை சார்ந்தே பெண்கள் இயங்கிட்டு இருந்தனால அவங்க மென்டலி, ஃபிசிக்கலி ரொம்ப ஸ்ட்ரெஸ்ஸான மனநிலையில் இருந்தாங்க. நான் ஆரோக்கியமேரி, ஜோதி அப்படின்ற மேலே சேர்ந்த 2 பெண்கள்கிட்ட பேசினப்போ அவங்க எங்ககிட்ட பகிர்ந்துக்கிட்டது வந்து தண்ணீர் வந்து அவங்களோட அன்றாடத்தை வந்து உறிஞ்சுறதா அவங்க சொல்லியிருந்தாங்க. அதுவும் மொரோவர் அந்த ஊரணியிலேருந்து தண்ணி எடுக்கணும், அவங்க நைட்லேருந்தே காத்துட்டு இருக்கணும். இப்போ நைட்லேருந்து தான் காலையிலே அவங்களுக்கு ஒரு 2-3 குடங்களோடு அவங்க வெளியில் வராங்க. அப்படி இருக்கிறப்ப அவங்களோட குழந்தைகளை அடுத்த நாள் வந்து ஸ்கூலுக்கு ப்ராப்பரான டைமிங்கில் அனுப்புறது எல்லாமே அவங்களுக்கு பிரச்சனையா இருந்து ஒரு நாள் ஃபுல்லாமே கொலாப்ஸ் ஆகுற மாதிரி அவங்க பகிர்ந்துக்கிட்டாங்க. இதனால் அந்த குழந்தைகளோட கல்வியும் வந்து பாதிக்கப்படுது. எல்லாத்தோட முக்கியமாக அந்த பெண்கள் வந்து பொருளாதார ரீதியாக ரொம்ப பின்னடைவில் இருக்காங்க. இப்போ தண்ணீர் சார்ந்து இயங்குறதுனால அவங்க எக்கனாமிக்கலி அவங்கள வலுப்படுத்துறதுக்கான வாய்ப்பே அவங்களுக்கு இல்லை. அதனால் வந்து தண்ணீரை நோக்கியே போயிட்டு இருக்காங்க. அங்கே வந்து ராமநாதபுரம் மாவட்டம் ஜென்ரலாகவே வறட்சி மிக்க பகுதினால அது எக்கனாமிக்கலி ஒரு பேக்வேர்டான ஸ்டேட். அங்கே இருக்கிறவங்க மோஸ்ட்லி பக்கத்தில் இருக்க மதுரை, கோயம்புத்தூர், திருப்பூர் அந்த மாதிரி இடங்களுக்கு தான் வேலைக்கு போறாங்க. அப்ப அந்த மாவட்டத்திலே வேலைவாய்ப்பு இல்லைன்றப்ப பெண்கள் இன்னும் கொஞ்சம் பின்தங்கி இருக்காங்க. அவங்களுக்கு இருக்கிற ஒரே ஒரு வேலைவாய்ப்பு வந்து 100 நாள் வேலைவாய்ப்பு திட்டம் தான். அதுலுமே இந்த தண்ணீர் சார்ந்து அவங்க எங்கிறதுனால அந்த வேலைக்குமே அவங்களால போக முடியல. அதனால வந்து அவங்க வருமானத்துக்கு தங்கள் கணவர்களையே ஒட்டுமொத்தமாக சார்ந்திருக்க நிலை இருக்குன்னா டொமஸ்டிக் அபியூஸுமே அவங்க வந்து சகிச்சுட்டு இருக்கிற சூழல் தான் ராமநாதபுரத்தில் இருக்கு. 2007 தமிழக அரசு வந்து அங்கே காவிரி குடிநீர் திட்டத்தை கொண்டு வராங்க. ஆனால் அந்த ஸ்கீம் வந்து எல்லாருக்குமே பயன்படுச்சுன்னா கண்டிப்பாக இல்லை. கடலோர மாவட்டங்களில் இருக்கிற மக்களுக்கு வந்து அது ஓரளவு அவங்க தண்ணீர் தேவையை தீர்த்தாலும் முழுமையாக தீரலை. அவங்களோட இந்த பிரச்சனை தொடர்ந்துட்டே இருக்கிறப்ப தான் 2020 வாஸ்கா, அதாவது வாட்டர் செக்யூரிட்டி அண்ட் கிளைமேட் அடாப்ஷன் இன் ரூரல் இந்தியா, அவங்க அதுக்கப்புறம் வந்து மத்திய கிராம மேம்பாட்டு அமைச்சகம், அதுக்கப்புறம் ராமநாதபுரம் ஊராட்சி வளர்ச்சித்துறை இவங்கெல்லாம் இணைந்து வந்து ராஜஸ்தானில் இருக்கிற டாங்கா மாடலை ராமநாதபுரத்தில் இம்ப்ளிஃபை பண்ணணும்னு நினைக்கிறாங்க. இதுக்கான ஃபுல் டெக்னிக்கல் சப்போர்ட் வந்து MSRF வந்து வழங்குறாங்க. அது மட்டும் இல்லாமல் ராமநாதபுரத்தில் இருக்கிற கடலோர மாவட்டங்களில் எந்தெந்த பகுதியில் இந்த டாங்கா தொட்டியை அமைக்கணும் அப்படின்ற டேட்டாஸையும் MSRF வந்து ஹெல்ப் பண்ணுறாங்க. அதன் அடிப்படையில் 2020 முதலாக RS மங்கலம் அப்படின்ற இடத்துல டாங்காவை கொண்டு வராங்க. டாங்கான்றது ஒரு மிகப்பெரிய மழைநீர் சேகரிப்பு தொட்டி. அது ஒரு வட்ட வடிவிலையோ இந்த மாதிரி அமைப்பில் தான் இருக்கும். வட்ட வடிவம், செவ்வக வடிவம் இதில் அமைக்கும். அதாவது வந்து ஒரு தொட்டியில் வந்து 60,000 லிட்டர் வரை தண்ணி வந்து சேகரிக்கலாம். இது மூலம் வந்து 200க்கும் மேற்பட்ட ஃபேமிலிஸ் வந்து பயன்பெறாங்க. ஆஃப்டர் டாங்கா வந்து அந்த பெண்களோட தண்ணீருக்காக அவங்க வேஸ்ட் பண்ண டைம் வந்து மாறி இருக்கிறத அவங்க பகிர்ந்துக்கிட்டாங்க. அது மட்டும் இல்லாமல் கைத்தொழில்கள் இந்த மாதிரி விஷயங்கள் அவங்க ஃபோக்கஸ் பண்ணுறதுக்கான டைமும் அவங்களுக்கு கிடச்சிருக்கு. அவங்கள குழந்தைங்களை வந்து சரியான நேரத்தில் பள்ளிக்கு அனுப்ப ஒரு மிகப்பெரிய ஸ்ட்ரெஸ் லெவல்லேருந்து அவங்க மீண்டதாக வந்து பகிர்ந்துக்கிட்டாங்க. மோரோவர் எல்லாத்த விட அந்த பகுதியில் கிடைக்கிற ஃப்ரெஷ் வாட்டர் வந்து இப்போதைக்கு அவங்களுக்கு இருக்கிறது டாங்கா மட்டும்தான். மற்றது எல்லாமே கலப்படமாக தான் இருக்குது. இப்போ ஊரணிலேருந்து அவங்க தண்ணி எடுத்தாலுமே அவங்களுக்கு வந்து அது சேத்தான் கொட்டைன்னு சொல்லுவாங்க. அந்த கொட்டையில் வந்து அந்த தண்ணியை தேய்ச்சா தான் அந்த க்ளீன் வாட்டராகவே அவங்களுக்கு கிடைக்கும். அதுவும் வந்து அது மோஸ்ட்லி ரொம்ப க்ளீன் கிடையாது, ஓரளவு க்ளீனான வாட்டர். அப்படி பார்க்கையில் டாங்காலேருந்து கிடைக்கிற தண்ணி தான் அவங்களுக்கு வந்து குடிநீருக்கான தண்ணியாக இருக்கிறதாகவும் பகிர்ந்துக்கிட்டாங்க. இப்போ டாங்கா அவங்களுக்கான தேவையை 70% ஃபுல்ஃபில் பண்ணியிருக்கு. இருந்தாலுமே கோடை காலங்களில் மழை பெய்யலைன்னா டாங்காவில் வந்து மழை நீர் வந்து சேகரிக்க முடியாது. அப்படி இருக்கிறப்ப அவங்க மீண்டும் அந்த பின்னோக்கிய நிலைக்கு தான் தள்ளப்படுவாங்க. அதனால தமிழ்நாடு கவர்மெண்ட் வந்து ஒரு ப்ராப்பரான குடிநீர் திட்டத்தை வந்து அந்த மக்களுக்கு அறிமுகப்படுத்தணும் அப்படின்ற வேண்டுகோளை இந்த கட்டுரையில் அவங்க சொல்லியிருந்தாங்க. அதை நான் பதிவும் செஞ்சுருந்தேன். இந்த கட்டுரையை படிச்சுட்டு ராமநாதபுரம் மாவட்ட ஆட்சியர் அலுவலகத்துலேருந்து எனக்கு ஒரு ஃபோன் கால் வந்திருந்தது. நீங்கள் வந்து மறுப்பு போடணும் அப்படின்னு சொல்லிட்டு, ஏன்னா நாங்கள் சில ஸ்கீம்லாம் பண்ணிகிட்டு இருக்கோம், நீங்கள் இப்படி எழுதுறதுனால மக்கள் கிட்ட இருந்து எங்களுக்கு எதிர்வினை வரும்னு சொல்லிட்டு. ஆனால் நான் கள நிலவரத்தை தான் பதிவு செஞ்சேன். வெறும் நான் மக்கள் கிட்ட மட்டும் பேசலை. செல்வமுகிலன் சார் என்னை மாவட்ட ஆட்சியர் அலுவலகத்துக்கு அழைச்சிட்டு போனாங்க. MSRF ஒரு சீனியர் சயின்டிஸ்ட். அங்கே இருக்கிற எல்லாருக்கூடையும் அந்த அதிகாரிகள் கிட்ட பேசி அதன் அடிப்படையிலேருந்து அந்த கட்டுரையில் எழுதுறதுனால நான் மறுப்பு வந்து தெரிவிக்கலை. அப்புறமேட்டு அவங்களும் வந்து நாங்கள் அதற்கான நடவடிக்கைகள் எடுக்கிறோம் அப்படின்னு சொன்னதுனால அது ஒரு நல்ல நேர்மறையான கட்டுரையாக அது வெளியில் வந்தது. அடுத்து என்னோட இரண்டாவது கட்டுரை வந்து நீலகிரியில் இருக்க ஊட்டி பழங்குடிகளை பற்றி. ஊட்டி அப்படின்னாலே நம்மளுக்கு டூரிஸ்ட் ஸ்பாட் தான் ஞாபகத்தில் இருக்கும். ஆனால் ஊட்டிக்கு இன்னொரு முகமும் இருக்குது. அந்த முகத்தை வந்து பழங்குடிகள் தான் காட்டுவாங்க. பழங்குடிகள் வந்து கடந்த 20 ஆண்டுகளாக அவங்களோட நீர் ஆதாரங்கள் குறைந்து வர்றதா என்கிட்ட பகிர்ந்துக்கிட்டாங்க. குறிப்பாக வந்து ஊட்டியை எடுத்துக்கிட்டால் 6 பழங்குடிகள் இருக்காங்க. தோடாஸ், கோத்தாஸ், குறும்பாஸ், இருளாஸ், காட்டுநாயக்கர், பணியர். இதில் வந்து அவங்களுக்குள்ளேயே ஒரு இன்ஈக்வாலிட்டி இருக்குது. கோத்தாஸ், தோடாஸ் வந்து பார்த்தீங்கன்னா அவங்க வந்து சிட்டியில் இருக்காங்க. ஊட்டியோட சிட்டியில் இருக்கிறதுனால அவங்க வந்து எக்கனாமிக்கலி கொஞ்சம் வெல்கேவாக இருக்காங்க. அவங்களோட குழந்தைகள் வந்து டாக்டர்ஸ், இன்ஜினியரிங் அந்த மாதிரி நிலைக்கு அவங்க வந்து நகர்ந்துட்டாங்க. ஆனால் இருளாஸ், பனியாஸ், காட்டுநாயக்காஸ் வந்து பார்த்தீங்கன்னா இன்டீரியர் வில்லேஜில் இருக்காங்க. அவங்களுக்கு தண்ணீர்ன்றதே இந்த கோடை காலங்களில், அதாவது ஏப்ரல் டு ஜூலை வந்து ஒரு மிகப்பெரிய போராட்ட காலமாக தான் இருக்குது. அப்படியான ஒரு பகுதியான ஊட்டியிலிருந்து 30 கிலோமீட்டர் தொலைவில் இருக்க மசனக்குடிக்கு நான் போக வேண்டியதாக இருந்தது இந்த கட்டுரைக்காக. மசனக்குடியில் பொக்காபுரம் அப்படின்ற கிராமத்துக்கு நான் போயிருந்தேன். அங்கே வந்து ஒரு பெரிய திருவிழா அன்னைக்கு நடந்துட்டு இருந்தது. ஒரு மக்கள் கூட்டமாக இருந்தாங்க. அந்த பொக்காபுரத்துக்கு பின்னாடி வந்து குறும்பர்பாடி அப்படின்னு இன்னும் ஒரு குக்கிராமம் இருக்குது. அந்த குக்கிராமத்தில் வந்து இந்த திருவிழாவுக்கும் அந்த குக்கிராமத்துக்கும் எந்த ஒரு எதிரொலிப்புமே இல்லை. அங்கே ரொம்ப அமைதியாக மக்கள் இருந்துட்டு இருந்தாங்க. அங்கே போய் சத்யா அப்படின்னு ஒரு பொண்ணை நான் பார்க்க வேண்டியிருந்தது. அவங்க வந்து குறும்பர்பாடியை சேர்ந்த ஒரு ட்ரைப். அவங்க போகிறப்பே ஒரு 2 மாட்டை எடுத்துகிட்டு போயிட்டு இருந்தாங்க. அந்த மாடு பார்த்தீங்கன்னா ரொம்ப அன்ஹெல்த்தியாக இருந்தது. ஒரு எலும்பும் தோலும் அதாக இருந்துட்டு இருந்தது. அவங்க வந்து சத்யா வந்து ஸ்கூலிங் முடிச்சிருக்காங்க. அவங்களுக்கு உடல்நிலை சரியில்லைனால அவங்களுக்கு காலேஜுக்கு போக முடியல. அவங்ககிட்ட கேட்டப்ப ஏப்ரல்லேருந்து ஜூலை வரையுமே எங்களோட நிலைமை, ஆகஸ்ட் வரையுமே எங்களுக்கு இதுதான் நிலைமை. தண்ணீர் சார்ந்து வந்து இந்த 6 மாதம் வந்து நாங்கள் டெய்லியும் வந்து 3 to 4 கிலோமீட்டர்ஸ் வந்து நாங்கள் ட்ராவல் பண்ண வேண்டியதாக இருக்கும் அப்படின்னு சொல்லியிருந்தாங்க. அது மட்டும் இல்லாமல் அங்கே இருக்கிற சத்யா அதுவும் அவங்க இன்னொரு விஷயத்தையும் பகிர்ந்துக்கிட்டாங்க. தண்ணீர் குறைவாக இருக்கிறதுனால காடுகளில் இருக்கிற அந்த புல்லோட எண்ணிக்கை வந்து குறைவாக இருக்கிறதுனால அவங்களோட அந்த கால்நடைகளுக்குன்னு தேவையான ஃபுட் வந்து கிடைக்கிறதில்ல. அதனால் இவங்க என்ன ஏர்ன் பண்ணுறாங்களோ அதன் மூலமாக தான் அந்த கால்நடைகளுக்குமே அவங்களுக்கு ஃபுட் கொடுக்கறதுனால ரொம்ப வறுமை நிலைக்கு அந்த 6 மந்த்மே அவங்க ரொம்ப பாவர்ட்டி ரொம்ப கீழாக தான் இருக்கிறதா பகிர்ந்துக்கிட்டாங்க. அது மட்டும் இல்லாமல் அந்த கால்நடைகளோட இழப்பும் ஏற்படுறதுனால அவங்க குடும்பமே வந்து பொருளாதார ரீதியாக பின்தங்கி இருக்கிறதா சத்யா வந்து பகிர்ந்துக்கிட்டாங்க. அதுக்கடுத்து பொக்காபுரத்துலேருந்து வாழைத்தோட்டம்ன்ற பகுதிக்கு நான் போயிருந்தேன். அங்கே வந்து இருளா பழங்குடியை சேர்ந்த ஜோதி அப்படிங்களவ மீட் பண்ணேன். அவங்க ஜோதி என்ன சொல்லியிருந்தாங்கன்னா, இந்த 6 மாத காலகட்டம் வந்து அவங்களுக்கு ஒரு டெட்லி சீசன் சொன்னாங்க. அதாவது சாவு காலம், அது என்ன வேணால் நடக்கலாம் அப்படின்னு சொல்லியிருந்தாங்க. ஆல்ரெடி அங்கே இருக்கிற உள்ள இன்டீரியர் இருக்க ட்ரைப்ஸ் வந்து தண்ணீர் இல்லாதனால வேறு இடத்துக்கு இடம் பெயர்ந்துட்டாங்க. குறைந்த எண்ணிக்கையில் தான் ட்ரைப் இருக்காங்க. அப்படி பார்த்தீங்கன்னா அவங்களோட வேலையே வந்து தண்ணி தான் தீர்மானிக்குது. ஒரு வருஷத்தில் 6 மாதம் தான் அவங்களுக்கு தண்ணீர் கிடைக்குது. அதனால் அந்த 6 மாதம் மட்டும் அங்கே இருக்கிற விவசாய தொழில்களை பண்ணிடுறாங்க. மற்ற 6 மாதத்துக்கு பிற மாவட்டங்களுக்கு போயிடுறாங்க வேலை தேடி. அப்படி இருக்கிறவங்க அவங்களுக்கு ஒரு அன்சர்டனிட்டி லைஃப்பில் இருக்கிறதுனால அவங்களோட சில்ட்ரன்ஸ்க்குமே போதிய எஜுகேஷன் கிடைக்கல. அதனால் ட்ராப் அவுட்ஸ் எண்ணிக்கை வந்து ரொம்ப அதிகமாக இருந்தது நான் பார்த்தேன். பொக்காபுரத்துலேயுமே வந்து சின்ன சின்ன பசங்கள்லாம் ஸ்கூலுக்கு போகாமல் அவங்க வீட்டிலே முடங்கி இருக்கிற சூழல் தான் இருந்தது. அதையும் நான் இந்த கட்டுரையில் வந்து பதிவு பண்ணியிருந்தேன். அடுத்தது பெத்தக்குட்டன் அப்படின்ற ஒரு ட்ரைப் பார்த்தா அவங்க தோடா நிலத்தை சேர்ந்தவங்க. ஊட்டியோட நீர் ஆதாரங்கள் குறைந்து வருவதனால கடந்த 20 வருடங்களாக அவங்களோட தொழிலுக்கு மிக்க உதவியாக இருந்த எருமைகள் எண்ணிக்கை வந்து குறைந்துருச்சு. அதனால் நாங்கள் அவங்களோட செல்வம் அப்படின்றது எருமைகள் தான். அப்போ அந்த எருமைகள் எண்ணிக்கை குறைஞ்சதுனால அவங்க இன்னும் எக்கனாமிக்லி அவங்க ரொம்ப பின்னோக்கி போகிட்டதா பெத்த கூட்டணும் பகிர்ந்துட்டு இருந்தார். இதற்கான தீர்வாக வந்து நான் நீரியல் ஆய்வாளர் ஜனகராஜன் கிட்ட கேட்டப்ப அவர் ஒரு ஆலோசனை கூறினார். அதை வந்து அரசு வந்து 10 வருடங்களுக்கு முன் வெளிவந்த மாதவ் காட்கேல் விதிமுறையை வந்து மத்திய அரசோ இல்லை தமிழக அரசோ ரெண்டுமே சேர்த்து அமல்படுத்த தவறிட்டாங்க. மாத்தியம் காட்கேல் ஆணையம் என்ன சொல்லுதுன்னு பார்த்தீங்கன்னா, மேற்கு தொடர்ச்சி மலையில் வந்து கிட்டத்தட்ட கடந்த 30 வருடங்களாக அதோட டென்சிட்டி வந்து குறைஞ்சிருச்சு. அதாவது 4ல் ஒரு பகுதி வந்து அதோட அடர்த்தியை இழந்துட்டதுனால அந்த ஊட்டியை சார்ந்த மலைப்பகுதியில் வந்து நீராதாரம் குறைஞ்சிருச்சு. அதனால் அங்கே இருக்கிற வைல்ட் அனிமல்ஸ் வந்து தண்ணி தேடி இந்த ட்ரைப்ஸ்லாம் இருக்கிற பகுதிக்கு வர்றதுனால அவங்களுக்கு அதுவே ஒரு பெரிய அச்சுறுத்தலாக இருக்குது. அப்படி இருக்கிறப்ப சுற்றுலா மேம்பாடுன்னு சொல்லிட்டு கவர்மெண்ட் வந்து அங்கே சில விஷயங்களை பண்ணுறாங்க. டிஃபாரஸ்டேஷன் பண்ணுறாங்க. அப்புறம் கிளைமேட் சேஞ்ச்னாலையும் அங்கே சில மாற்றங்கள் நடக்குது. டிஃபாரஸ்டேஷனில் காட்டு நிலப்பகுதிகள் பயன்படுறதுனால இன்னுமே கூடுதலாக நீர் ஆதாரங்கள் வந்து குறைவாக இருக்கிறதுனால மக்கள் இன்னும் கூடுதலாக தள்ளப்படுறாங்க. அப்படி இருக்கிறப்ப காட்டு நிலங்களை மற்ற எந்த பயன்பாட்டுக்கும் பயன்படுத்தக்கூடாதுன்றது தான் முதன்மையாக மாதவ் காட்கேலோட அறிக்கை வலியுறுத்துது. அதை வந்து கவர்மெண்ட் வந்து பின்பற்றணும் அப்படின்னு சொல்லியிருந்தாங்க. அதுவும் இல்லாமல் நான் பழங்குடி செயற்பாட்டாளர் செல்வராஜ் கிட்ட பேசினப்ப அவர் ஒரு ஆலோசனை கூறினார். அதாவது வந்து எலெக்ஷன் நடக்கிறப்ப ட்ரைப்ஸ் உள்ள இன்டீரியராக உள்ள ட்ரைப்ஸை போய் அவங்க ஓட்டு கேட்டு உள்ள அதிகாரிகள் போய் வாங்கிட்டு வராங்க. ஆனால் இந்த மாதிரி அந்த 6 மாத காலத்தில் அவங்களுக்கு தண்ணீர் தேவைப்படுறப்ப அங்கே யாரும் போகிறதில்ல. அந்த மக்கள் தான் தங்களுக்கான தண்ணீரை தேடிட்டு இருக்காங்க. அப்படின்றப்ப அவங்க வாய்ஸ் வந்து அதிகமாக பேசப்படணும். மேஜர் மீடியாவில் அது பேசப்படலை அப்படின்னு சொல்லிட்டு, அது மட்டும் இல்லாமல் பழங்குடிகளுக்கு ஒதுக்கப்படுற நிதி வந்து முறைகேடாக இருக்கிறதுனால அவங்களுக்கான அடிப்படை தேவைகள் வந்து இங்கே கொண்டு வரப்படுறதில்ல. அதையும் வந்து அரசு வந்து கவனத்தில் வச்சுருக்கணும்னு சொல்லியிருந்தாங்க. அது எல்லாமே இந்த கட்டுரையில் பகிர்ந்திருந்தேன். என்னோட கீழாக இந்த 2 கட்டுரைலாம் எடுத்துக்கிட்டது வந்து மார்ஜினலைஸ்டு பீப்புளோட குரல் வந்து வலுவாக கேட்கப்படணும். என்னுடைய அடுத்த ஃப்யூச்சரில் நான் என்னோட சப்ஜெக்ட் ஓரியன்டாக இவங்களோட குரல் அதிகமாக பேசப்படுற கட்டுரைகளை வந்து தொடர்ந்து எழுதணும் அப்படின்றத நோக்கிய நான் இதிலேருந்து எடுத்துக்கிட்டேன். நன்றி. தேங்க்யூ.
Thank you, Indu, for your gender-sensitive reporting, and you truly demonstrated what it means to apply the theory of intersectionality into reporting. Since Shafiq is has not joined us online today, I think he's shared a video of his presentation. So, can we watch that?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Shafiq, working with Reporter TV, Kerala. First of all, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude and sincere thanks to Mina Swaminathan Research Foundation for selecting me for this fellowship. I realize this is a great opportunity to share my experience in front of a panel of esteemed personalities. Through this fellowship, I had a privilege of exploring the complex relationship between gender and water in 2 unique regions of Kerala. One is Vipin Island in Ernakulam and other is the Kuttanad region of Alappuzha district. My first story took me to the Vipin Island, where I witnessed the heavy struggles of mothers living in a region where the sea and backwaters converge. Vipin is a long, narrow island lying between Cochin Bay and the Arabian Sea. The island is 27 kilometers long and has an average width of only 2 kilometers. With over 2 lakh people living in this small area, it is one of the most densely populated islands in Asia. For the mainstream society in Kerala, the word flood reminds us the major calamities happened in 2018 and 2019. People are still trying to overcome the damages caused by those floods. But for the people of Vipin, floods have always been a part of their lives. Today's Vipin is flooded even during the hottest summers, primarily due to the coastal erosion and the global climate change. Here I comes to my story. When we deeply examine the flooding issues of Vipin Island, we can see that the hazards of flood experienced by the community differ based on the gender roles within that community. The constant flooding has made life unbearable for the residents, especially the women. I met a woman named Sunitha in Elagunnapuzha village of Vipin. Sunitha, her husband Ramesh, their 3 children and their elderly mother, 6 people in total living in a temporary shed. Nearby we can see their concrete house, now sunken halfway into the muddy ground. They built that house after years of hard work and loans from the multiple banks. They started living in it in 2015, but just 6 years later, in 2021, the houses began sinking into the ground. Now it is uninhabitable, and they forced to live in a temporary shed. The shed has only 2 beds and 3 chairs. Sunitha's husband goes to work during the day and returns at the night. But Sunitha and her children have to stay there day and night, as they have nowhere else to go. The children spend all their time on a bed, unable to play like other kids who grew up in the open fields or neighboring houses. Sunitha described their life as one spent on sewage. This situation severely affects the physical and mental health of both Sunitha and her children. The people of Vaipin are left with unanswered questions. How can we sleep? How can we cook? And where can we defecate in the house full of water? The women of Vaipin bear witness to how a problem affecting an entire region impacts women uniquely. Where the affairs of a family are submerged, the distress experienced by the men and women is vastly different. In Vaipin, most men are fishermen. They leave for the sea in the morning and return in the evening or late night. When they are not in the sea, they often stay at the harbor, eat in hotels and sleep in the sheds used for storing fishing equipments. Men have several ways to survive without entering flooded house. However, women have no such alternatives. They have to manage life amidst water, fetching drinking water from distant public tap, cooking meals and sending children to school, often by wading or swimming through the water. These women face indescribable hardship every day. My second story is from Kuttanad in Alappuzha district. Kuttanad is known for its vast backwaters, yet the region faces severe drinking water scarcity. When we delve into the issues of Kuttanad, we find similarities with Vaipin. In most Kerala villages, including Kuttanad, men typically work outside the home. Women are responsible for cooking, cleaning and childcare. The tasks of fetching water for household needs falls entirely on them. Women carry 20 to 30 liters of water in pots and cans daily, which leads to the serious health issues over time. This additional burden significantly impacts their quality of life. By the time the men return home from the work in the evening, it is expected, almost as an unwritten rule, that women will have ensured the household has enough water. The sacrifices and hardship women endure to bring clean water often go unnoticed by their families. In Kuttanad, I have also highlighted the positive impacts of the Mina Swaminathan Research Foundation's initiatives. Projects like rainwater harvesting have provided much needed relief. With the installation of rainwater tanks, around 1,000 families in the area now have access to clean drinking water. These stories from Vaipin and Kuttanad reveals how water crisis disproportionately impact women. Their role as primary caregivers means they are the first to feel the effects of water scarcity, contamination or flooding. This invisible burden is compounded by societal expectations and the lack of gender-sensitive policies in the water management. It is essential to recognize that these are not just environmental issues. They are deeply social and gendered. Addressing them requires systemic changes, including involving women in decision-making processes, prompting community-based solutions and investing in sustainable infrastructure. Thank you for listening.
Next up is Shatrupa Samantaraya from Orissa.
सभी को मेरा नमस्कार। मैं शत्रुपा सामंतराय हूँ उड़ीसा से। मैं यहाँ के एक सैटेलाइट चैनल अर्गस न्यूज में काम करती हूँ। पहले तो सभी को धन्यवाद। स्वामीनाथन फेलोशिप मुझे 2024 में मिला था और उसमें मैं 2 स्टोरी की थी। वहाँ पे हमारा थीम था जैसे कि वाटर क्लाइमेट चेंज, ये सब को लेके एक स्टोरी करने 2 स्टोरी करने वाले थे हम। तो पहला स्टोरी था मेरे वाटर, मेंस्ट्रुएशनल हाइजीन और क्लाइमेट चेंज, ये तीनों को मिला के मेरा पहला स्टोरी था। जैसे कि उड़ीसा का एक बरगढ़ डिस्ट्रिक्ट है, उड़ीसा का बरगढ़ डिस्ट्रिक्ट, ये जब भी यहाँ पे जो महिलाएं हैं लगभग 3 से 4 किलोमीटर अपना हाइजीन मेंटेन करने के लिए और उनका सैनिटरी नैपकिन से लेके जो भी क्लॉथ है उनको साफ करने के लिए लगभग 3 से 4 किलोमीटर वो चल के जाते थे। और दिन में लगभग अगर देखा जाए तो 5 से 6 बार वो रिवर तक चल के जाते हैं। और जैसे कि वहां पे अगर अभी जो है धीरे धीरे फैक्ट्रियां बढ़ने लगी है उस पास में, तो पानी का जो क्राइसिस है अभी धीरे धीरे बढ़ रहा है। और क्लाइमेट चेंज और ये सब के वजह से जो रिवर का जो रिवर है वो धीरे धीरे सूख रहा है। और कैसे वो लोग महिलाएं जो है लगभग 3 से 4 किलोमीटर चल के जाते हैं। और जो यहाँ पे जब समर सीजन होता है लगभग ये बरगढ़ जो वेस्टर्न पार्ट ऑफ उड़ीसा है, जैसे बरगढ़ बलांगीर ये सब एरिया में 45 से 50 डिग्री तक टेम्परेचर चला जाता है। और उसी टाइम में भी और गांव पे उसी टाइम में भी वो लोग 3 से 4 किलोमीटर चल के अपना सैनिटरी नैपकिन बदलने के लिए जाते हैं। और जैसे भी वहां पे जैसे मैं महिलाओं से मिलने लगी बात करने लगी तो वो लोग बोलने लगे कि घर के जो व्हीकल्स होते हैं जैसे कि आप गाड़ी मोटरसाइकिल हो गया या साइकिल हो गया, वो लोग अपने डेली रूटीन के काम में जितना यूज नहीं करते हैं सैनिटरी नैपकिन बदलने के लिए उसको ज्यादा यूज करते हैं। क्यों करते हैं? क्योंकि उसी में बैठ के, क्योंकि समर सीजन में चल के जाना मुश्किल हो जाता है, क्योंकि 45 टू 50 डिग्री सेंटीग्रेड होता है यहाँ पे। एक जगह से दूसरी जगह कर्फ्यू जैसे लग जाता है, तो एक जगह से दूसरी जगह जाने के लिए, तो वो रिवर को जाने के लिए उन लोगों को 4 से 5 किलोमीटर जैसे जाना पड़ता है, तो वो लोग व्हीकल में जाते हैं। और दूसरा जो स्टोरी था मेरा करापुट से था। और वहां पे एक करापुट के एक डिस्ट्रिक्ट से था, वहां पे कैसे महिलाएं जो है खेती नहीं कर पा रहे थे। और जैसे कि हम लोग जानते हैं उड़ीसा की अगर हम बात करते हैं करापुट डिस्ट्रिक्ट में, वहां पे ज्यादा बाकी डिस्ट्रिक्ट से हिसाब से अगर हम उड़ीसा की यहाँ पे अगर रेशियो देखते हैं तो कोरापुट डिस्ट्रिक्ट में ज्यादा महिलाएं वहां पे काम करते हैं, ज्यादा महिलाएं फार्मिंग के खेती में काम करते हैं। वहां पे बिल्कुल भी पानी नहीं था और वो लोग खेती नहीं कर पा रहे थे। और धीरे धीरे उनका जो फाइनेंशियल जो बैलेंस था धीरे धीरे घट रहा था। उसी समय कैसे गवर्नमेंट और MS स्वामीनाथन रिसर्च फाउंडेशन मिलके उन लोगों को हेल्प किए और उनको 24/7 जैसे उनको पानी वहां पे पानी दिया गया और कैसे खेती करेंगे, खेती का क्या क्या नया नया टेक्निक है उन लोगों को सिखाया गया। और वो महिलाएं अब साल में अगर देखा जाए साल में साल में 12 महीना वो लोग अब खेती कर रहे हैं। ये 2 स्टोरी था स्वामीनाथन फेलोशिप में मैं ये 2 स्टोरी की।
Thank you, Shatarupa. Can I invite our expert commentators to Sainath? Yes. Mr. Sainath, would you like to start and share your comments on the presentations our fellows have made now?
First of all, I'd like to congratulate the fellows. I think they've done what they should as journalists, which is to try telling their stories through the lives and lived experience of everyday people. You know, no amount of datafication and quoting of reports makes that impact that telling the story through the lives of people does. And they've done that. And having listened to all three, I'd also like to tell MSSRF that they have given their fellowships to very, very worthy candidates. I also liked the fact that each of them presented, apart from Shafiq, we heard 3 different languages there today. Yeah. So, including Shafiq who spoke in English, but Tamil, English, and Odia, and accompanying the accompanying presentations were in English, and that's very good. I think that really created a good balance and a sense of how articulate these journalists are in their language, which is to me an important thing. And some of the things they focused on were quite brilliant. You know, Indu Gunasekhar's points about Ramnad. Now, this is a district that has, by the way, one of the things that happened which made Ramnad's aridness and everything else was the coming of the Tungabhadra Dam and other minor dams which sort of diverted, which removed the one semi-perennial river coming to that area. Yeah, the Vaigai, if I remember the name correctly. Secondly, Ramnad has had high migrations, very high migrations, and that's correctly understood by Indu in her presentation. And given the limited amount of time she had, as each of the presenters did, otherwise she could have, I'm sure there was more detail with her about what happens when you migrate, how the pressure increases on women. What happens is that when you move to a new place, you are very likely to run into the hostility of the already settled community there. All over the country you see this, and by the way, you saw it in COVID after millions, maybe crores of people returned to their villages. The pressure on water resources immediately trebled, quadrupled. And you had groups of villagers throwing stones at women who they considered foreigners, so to speak, in their vicinity. And so the idea of looking at the migrations of Ramnad, that was excellent. And the important point about salinity, because the wells have now gone, the bore wells, tube wells, whatever, have gone really deep. They went really deep even 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And there's a point beyond which you are going to strike in a coastal area, the saline water. Also the hyper-commercialization of water that's happened in Ramnad, one of the pioneering states where the phenomenon, as Janikarajan and others noted, Tannir Adipati, the water lords of Ramnad, the emergence of that. And also a look at what are the possible solutions that each of the three has attempted. And I think that a journalist's role really is not so much to define poverty and deprivation as to describe it faithfully. And I think that all your three fellows have done that. I thought Shafiq's points about, Kutanad, again, a region I've been to even recently in 2018, 19, and just the beginning of 20th. I think that's really terrific, the findings and the work. And it gave us a very, very vivid idea of what the women of those areas go under, a state of semi-permanent flooding. And Shatrupa's work from Odisha, it really captures 3 to 4 kilometers. And by the way, in periods of scarcity, in periods of migration, in periods of, disruption, like COVID, the stress doubles and trebles and quadruples. I think that I'm also very impressed the range of issues that these fellows covered in their 10 minutes. That was actually quite brilliant to my mind, the way they did it. And it's very obvious to me, as a person who does these things, to realize that they all have a hell of a lot of other material which they couldn't share with us in a time thing, which is fine. I'm sure there will be other occasions. Maybe their articles and presentations, maybe MSSRF should translate these into English and other language in their taking both the Indian language versions and English translations. Maybe you bring out a small book or booklet, whatever the case is. I think that would be very good. Now, the larger canvas within which these problems are located are also pretty devastating when we get to them. But once again, I'd like to congratulate these fellows. I have a great distaste for cut and paste desktop journalism. I am very, very hostile to it.
Excuse me.
And sorry?
Sir, I just forgot one thing. After that story of Bargat district, Putka village, after that story that the Sarpanch and the MLA of that district, they construct a water tank for the women.
That's excellent. That's really very good. And it shows impact and, impact and fallout of your writing. And that's really, really very good. I congratulate you on that. I think really you've done a terrific job. And I wouldn't say so otherwise. I think all three of you have done a very, very good job. Getting to the larger context in which some of these things are now happening, which we have to keep tying our stories to. One, let's look at women and look at water. By the way, water in this country, if you just by the government's official figures, there has been a tremendous collapse in per capita availability of water. One in 1951, that was 5,197 cubic meters. In 2001, that had fallen to 1,816 cm. In 2011, it had fallen to 1,545 cubic meters. This year, it stands at 1,341 cubic meters, according to the government. These you can see these even from the Press Information Bureau or the Water Resources Ministry's database. You'll find that they make predictions for 2030 and 2050. But hold on. Every prediction they have made for the different decades has been far more optimistic than what actually transpired at the end of that decade. So if they're telling us that we're going to have 1,100 by 2050, I think that's a dream. And the other thing is that there are two things to remember about this availability of water. One, it's all about human beings. Yeah? Even if it's correct, accurate, whatever, it's all about human beings. There are millions of other species we share the planet with who are also dependent on water for life, who are also part of the, water cycle of the needs and survival issues that are based on water. That's one set of issues. And two, we need to, all of us, look at the politics of the issues. Look, India, every major interstate dispute in this country has something to do with water. Whether it's Karnataka, Tamil Nadu and the Kaveri waters, Kerala and Karnataka and the Kabini, Karnataka and Andhra, the Almaty, Kerala and Tamil Nadu, Mullaperiyar, Haryana, Rajasthan, Punjab, and the Beas rivers, and internationally too. I mean, what is our biggest problems with each of our neighbors? Bangladesh, Tista River and the Faraka Barrage. N- Nepal, the Kosi and the Kosi Barrage, Kosi River, the barrage there, which, by the way, is in danger of coming down one day with mega deaths on both sides of the border. And Indus waters with Pakistan, all, and even, by the way, not just drinking water, but even sea waters, you have disputes. Kachativu with Sri Lanka, the water is an explosive issue with both states and each other, interstate problems and international problems. That's one thing. Second is women and their labor. Also, they operate within a canvas where the Oxfam, analyzing ILO data in 2020, came out with the fact that every day, every 24 hours, women across the world contribute, they do 12.5 billion hours of unpaid work every single day. That contributes annually $10.8 trillion to the global economy, but they are unpaid. Okay? $10.8 trillion, as Oxfam points out, is 3 times the size of the world's tech industry. These are all 2020 figures. But this doesn't just reflect the obscene inequality of our times. It entrenches it, deepens it, and it perpetuates it. It creates structures of perpetuation of those inequalities. And when it comes again, the kind of stress that COVID-19 or migrations or other things brought, central to the issue is what happens to women there. And what are we doing about it that is actually deepening the problem? Yeah, there's a town called Tiruchengood in Tamil Nadu, about 20 minutes drive from Erode, which is the world capital of borewell rigs. Well, that's another story. I want to go into it, but just the rigs from Tiruchengood alone drill 2 billion cubic feet into your aquifer across the country every year. That has implications for climate. It has implications and for women labor, the climate implications are deadly. I think Professor Suman Sahai, I thought I saw her name amongst the attendees. She came up with a brilliant idea a few months ago at a Kisan Mazdoor Commission meeting in Delhi. One of the things we are all observing with great distress is that the number of women agricultural laborers dying of heat stroke has risen. Now, nobody has official or accurate data on it. Prima facie, it's very, very visible. That, like take Churu in Rajasthan. In 2020-21, it touched temperatures of 51 degrees. By the way, the same winter, it was the coldest region of the northern plains. But the fact is that women in Churu, and indeed now increasingly in many other parts of the country, they are going to be working, most of the agricultural laborers are women, and they're going to be working in temperatures between 47 degrees rising to 50 degrees. You're going to see that in the next 5 to 10 years. What can we do about it? What about their water needs? What about the body water retention? And Professor Sahai came up with this excellent suggestion of dugouts at the farms where people can take a break with their chai or whatever it is, maybe with their child. Earlier, it used to happen that the workers, when they took a break, would sit under a clump or a bunch of big trees. The trees have gone. Most fields are bereft of trees in the hot areas. You'll see that as well. So having something, maybe a mud dugout, because that makes it much cooler, can make a huge difference to that woman. And I think that was a wonderful idea. Lastly, essentially, we need to be framing the entire large canvas through the lens of justice. Water, the exploitation of water, and especially women's woes underwater, you can see that fit into a simple, not simple, into a convenient framework of what I call the 6 transfers. 6 water transfers. I'll close with that, but the 6 water transfers are every day. There's so much in our life, so close to our eyes that we don't notice them and we don't categorize them. One is water in the country flows upwards from poor to rich, from rural to urban, within agriculture, from food crop to cash crop, from from agriculture to industry, yeah, and even you also have the issue of virtual water exports, which will give you an idea of how much water we are using in our cultivation methods. India is the second largest exporter of virtual water, which means how much water you put into the food grain that you produce and export. India is the second largest after Thailand in terms of the amount of virtual water exports. Now, okay, let's take the poor to rich is very obvious. There is also lifestyle to livelihoods to lifestyle transfers. That's the 6th, or rather the 5th transfer. Yeah, all over Maharashtra, which has been suffering drought on and off for 20 years, scores of buildings are coming up with swimming pools on every floor. In industry, 2% of farmers in this country, in the state, 4%, use 68% of its water because it goes to agriculture. Now, all the problems of these women fit into these frameworks also. And it therefore means declaration of water as a basic right, not just a human right, but for all species. It means that when we discuss the rights of women, we keep it against that political canvas of seeking socio-economic and political justice. And I think that's the way to go. Thank you.
Aparna to share her comments.
Thank you so much for having me today. I've learned so much from the work of the fellows. Such fantastic, brilliant stories from different corners of the country, and of course, as always, from my teacher P. Sainath. Such a pleasure to listen to him once again. So I suppose, the story of water can be told in so many different ways. You can tell it across borders, like he said, you can talk about it across regions, across countries, across states, but then you can also zoom in on a single well, on a single woman's experience. And I think that's what makes the story so much more powerful. And I think that's what all the 3 fellows have done. They have focused it on the individual person. They made it such a personal narrative. They literally transported us to these different regions, both by, their words, what stories they have bought, and also the photographs. I think Shafiq's photographs are also quite brilliant. When he zoomed in on the submerged feet, it's really telling, right? You don't want to live that life for a single day, and then that is somebody's everyday existence. And Indu very beautifully took us to this very touristy spot of Tamil Nadu that we take for granted, and then there is a completely different side there. We run away to escape the hot searing summers of Chennai, and then you find there that because of our running away there and the destruction of the forest, there is a whole group of people who are migrating with their, or walking around with their cattle, children who ought to be in school and college, and they have no other choice but do that. I think the brilliant thing about all the three, fellows and their work is that they've brought out stories that are otherwise completely neglected by mainstream media. I think Sainath would completely agree with that, except for times when there is an extreme event in the countryside, when there is a drought or when there is a flood, the everyday process is largely 95% of the time neglected. There is nobody talking about the processes that are happening, especially water stress, because it is taken for granted that the woman will somehow make those 4 pots or 5 pots of water available for every household, see that it runs seamlessly, food is on the table, and subsidize our own food, right? Like when we are talking about farming and the role of women making the water available for agriculture, we are basically saying that their unpaid labor of making that water available somehow puts the food on our plates at a rate that we can afford it, or at a rate that we want to pay for it, right? Anything over that, and then there's a big hue and cry. Or if such a situation had happened like in Vipin, that woman whose house has gone in, submerged in 6 years, and they are living in a temporary accommodation with the children, whereas the husband is able to escape this. If this had happened in Chennai, even in, the northern Chennai or even the neglected parts of Chennai, I'm sure there would be a lot more, or even in Kerala, right, in the bigger cities, in a more, let's say, a more well-to-do locality, there would be more talk about it. This is the first time I'm hearing about this situation. So that says a lot about the invisibilization of these stories in media. And I think it's brilliant that the fellows have had an opportunity to bring those stories out, today. Indu's work in Ramnath, the very fact that the collectorate called her and told her that, you have to have a rebuttal for the story, and then, you have to kind of take back what you have said, and then accepting what, her position, and then making the water available, I think that's brilliant. I mean, I think that's, the kind of impact that this fellowship has, already done, because I think sometimes, you spend 4-5 years chasing stories, and then I keep saying this, at the end of the series, I don't have a single solution, right? Like I just have many more problems than the problem statements that I had in the beginning of it. So the fact that you have actually been able to make an impact is like, very commendable. Congratulations on that. And in Ooty, of course, the inequality between the tribes, when we have this whole brushing or lumping, I would say, vast swaths of people into one bucket. So we say all women have a certain problem, all tribes have a certain problem, or all groups of people have a certain problem. And here you have the nuance between the tribes, what you were able to bring out, this particular group of people in this place. So it's a hyperlocal problem which needs a hyperlocal solution. So we can't have a policy that is implemented maybe in Delhi or maybe in Chennai. It may not be able to find a solution there. But I think by highlighting a particular problem, you can actually have a shift in the policy that can fix it. And what you said about Savagalam, as they say, 6 months in a year, it is Savagalam. That's such a powerful word. And the fact that you carried that word into the print and, brought it into people's notice, I think that's, really interesting. And also that, Tanka, the whole, method of building something, bringing about a change in association with an organization, and what kind of positive impact that makes in the region. I think, again, that's brilliant. And what you said about, buffaloes, right? Like when the girl walks the buffaloes, again, that's going back to what Sainath says about water being something that is not just for human use, right? It goes beyond that. And again, all that has brought out in so much rich detail in your stories. In Shafiq's stories, I think I was really blown away by the brilliance of the photographs, as much as, that overhead shot of Vipin, and the fact that it's so picturesque. This would actually appear in a very different context, in media, as this lovely place, touristy place, again, the backwaters, and, the unsaid stories about the backwaters being a place of water stress. And again, the inequality, and the brilliant point about the inequality, I think, which came through in all the stories is that it pushes women into that state when they are dependent on men, which is not the ideal situation. So that leads to more domestic assaults. It leads to children dropping out. It leads to, periods of time when, the whole family does not function in any other way except looking for that next bit of water. And again, there in Kuttanad, the MSSRF intervention and, what that means for the people living there. I think that's, again, something that, came out very, very strongly in Vipin's Shafiq stories. And Again, I really love the slide that he had there with, it just said, where is a place to defecate? Like, really, where is a place to defecate when everything is covered with water? And, very, very powerful storytelling there. In Shatrupa's stories, the fact that it's 45 and 50 degrees, between 45 and 50 degrees, and these women are making 4 to 5 trips. My Hindi is a bit patchy, so I think this is what she said. 4 to 5 trips to go to the water source, the river that's drying up, and that's about 3 to 4 kilometers of walk just to change their napkins or, clean the napkins. That's a terrible situation for any women. It's not something that they menstruate out of choice. It's not something that they have a choice over, and how it only affects a certain gender. So that intersectionality of gender, that came out like so brilliantly in Shatrupa's story. And also climate change, right? I mean, this 45 to 50, was this the case one generation ago? What was the temperatures range then? What has happened in a single generation? That would be very interesting to capture over a period of time, because it's only going to get worse. But again, highlighting a story like this, I'm sure leaves you some room for a policy change, what it can be. Again, she spoke about an intervention in the farming story, where she spoke about MSSRF bringing in 24/7 availability of water. And again, there was an impact there from the Sarpanch, calling her and making, changes there. So I think the fact that in all the 3 stories, the impact was very, obvious. There was a, clear map to look for solutions and not just highlight the problems, and I think that was brilliant. Looking beyond human availability or human need for water, again really nice. And the fact that you're talking about women's unpaid labor, which as Sainath quantified, this is like $10.8 trillion in the global economy every year, which is 3 times that of the tech industry. I mean, like, if we ask all the techies to work 1 year of unpaid work, I'm sure there's going to be like a revolution in the world. But the fact that women do this year after year, and then put the food on the table or whatever it is, keep the rural economy functioning just by doing that very, very quietly without a murmur. And even if they are murmuring, nobody is hearing it because nobody is reporting on it. And here we are making, the reports available to people from 3 very, very different, unique geographical regions. And like I said, hyperlocal stories, which can actually bring about a change, with hyperlocal policy, changes possible. So when media plays up only the water scarcity in city, I mean, I remember the kind of tweets that we had just after the northeast monsoon was over, and then we all kept saying all the Chennai lakes are full. So next year there is no water problem, in Chennai or in Bombay, where of course the water sources are not in Bombay at all. They are very far off, not very different from Chennai, of course. We are talking about water in cities in such a big way, whether we have, I mean, I can't imagine in my street if the water goes off for 2 days. I know that everybody will be out in the streets complaining and calling up, the IAS officers they know, and whoever we know, just to see that, the water is back as quickly as possible. And the fact that people cannot do that for decades of their life or go through their entire life without having piped water in their houses, that seems like such a staggering thing, and I think there can be not enough stories written about it. It's fantastic to have these 3 and really wonderful to participate today. Thank you so much for having me, and look forward to ma'am's insights.
Thank you, Aparna. Professor Nitya Rao, can you share your comments?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks to everybody. I think that thanks to the 3 presentations, it was absolutely brilliant. And I wanted also to congratulate Indu, Shafiq and Shatarupa, all 3 of you, I think, for really bringing out really insightful stuff. And I think the new thing this year, Ranga, is that actually the fellowship itself has generated impact. I don't think we've had this in the past, when we've, that's always the goal. But you start with the stories and of telling the stories of these people. But I was very impressed that all 3 of you in some way showed at Sarpanch level or local level some kind of impact. I think to me, not being a media person, and also I won't repeat some of the things that Sainath and Aparna you've said, which was so true, which I totally agree with, is that I guess this is what, I mean, maybe picking up on the theme of inequality and injustice and of it going on for a long time. And of course, this shows that the power of the media, that, if when these stories are put out, people are very sensitive to it, to any kind of bad publicity, whether they want you to retract the story or to do something else. And I think in today's political economy, Sainath will know this, but this is right up to the top level. If the Time magazine or somebody says something against the government of India, or BBC, they get very sensitive to it, and they immediately want to do something to show that they are true. And I think what you've done at the local level, to me, is the same thing at a different scale, that really showing the power of media, particularly in terms of, whether we call it fifth pillar of democracy, it exists or it doesn't exist. But I think that when it's done well, or when these stories are told, that it can have change. So I really thank, first of all three of you for really pursuing these stories and also doing the follow-up in terms of engaging with these local panchayats and sarpanches, which is probably beyond the call of a journalist to do. So I do really appreciate that. I mean, I just had a few points that I wanted to pick up. Actually, something which Sainath said at the beginning about maybe MSSRF should put together these in terms of creating an alternative narrative. And Ranga, you mentioned in the beginning that this is the 4th year. And I think every year we have had some very powerful stories. I think the first year the theme was on COVID and gender. The second year the theme was on nutrition. And then this is food systems, broader food systems, and this year on water. So I think we've been speaking about climate change and food security and food systems and availability and so on. And actually, I was at a global event for the next IPCC thing. But the way they look at evidence is just sort of synthesis of published papers or large data. So there's a lot of talk about large data. And I think, Sainath, you mentioned this, which I agree with totally, that, we can do any amount of data, but it's the lived experience that really speaks. But somehow we have not been able to get a voice for this lived experience within these large global spaces like the IPCC, for instance. They still do, hard data, which is important. I mean, you're a storehouse of hard data yourself, Sainath, which is very powerful. But I think that some way of thinking about how do we balance and give work towards giving more weightage to this kind of thing. So I know that from my meeting in Berlin, which I attended in June, they said, evidence synthesis should be all published in journals or whatever it is. So even newspapers, for instance, is in academic parlance seen as one step lower in terms of its credibility, the news media compared to academic research. I think it's a false dichotomy, because what we've seen from all our three presenters is that these are very well-researched stories. So I think whether MSSRF, we can brainstorm with others like Aparna and Sainath and others, Nalini, who are on board with this, Murli, to see how can we actually contribute towards creating an alternative narrative from the perspective of gender and, broader resources, farming systems, food security, agriculture, etc. Water, of course, is a very central part of that. I think the third thing which I wanted to say, which others have also said, is really the invisibility of women's work. And I think, Sainath, you quantified it. This has been from the 80s, 70s and the 80s, the whole plea of the women's movement, saying that the women's work, but their work is invisible. In fact, 2025, very timely also to put together material on that, because this is the 50th year of 1975, which was the first International Women's Year of the UN. So 2025 is actually 50 years since that. In 1975, Veena Mazumdar and others in India, when they came out with the Towards Equality report, in which actually Mina Swaminathan was also involved, they showed that there's no data. And it seems to me and that's why it's set in process a decade. It's 1975 to 85, when the UN, particularly the ILO, said that we have to start collecting gender disaggregated data. In the 1970s and 80s, there were a lot of time use studies and things like that which were done. After the Beijing conference 1988-99, Government of India also did a time use study in 5 states. But it's a very powerful tool, which showed that women do 53% of the work, but they're not recognized for it in monetary or even in social terms. It's taken for granted. And I think this was so powerful that Government of India then decided to stop time use studies. And it was only recently, I think 2019, that again a time use study was done, which showed even more drastic skewing, that now 55 to 56% of total work, what is described as work, is done by women. But at the same time, if you look at labor force and all that, it's still some 26%, 28%. So you can very easily say women are not doing much. So I think there's a real dilemma in terms of what are the tools and how can we use the tools that we have to again change the narrative. I think the women's movement has been working on this, on invisibility of women's work. They came up with tools. Not much has changed. And I think what has changed is the context. So I think both Sainath and Aparna, you mentioned climate change and growing crises, growing inequalities. So from 50 years ago compared to now, actually the inequalities have increased. The crises have increased. So how do we position now, and probably the women's invisible work has increased even more. Somebody was asking me this morning that, why is it women only 26% in India in the workforce? How do you explain it? It's very difficult to explain because when you look on the ground, whether they are standing for 3 hours in waiting for water to fill or whatever, we know that they are working all the time. We know also that they have time use studies wherever they exist show that they have very little time for rest with implications on their health, nutrition, etc. I think the issue of migration came up, and even though, except for Hindu, you had some reference to it, but there was not that much. And in fact, Sainath spoke about it, of course. And I'm very curious, and maybe this is something again that MSSRF should pursue in some other research, when we really talk about gender, we're also talking about the relationships between men and women. I remember the pictures that came out in COVID in Ahmedabad and other places that everybody was recommending hand washing. Soumya, of course, was in WHO. We were meant to wash our hands. And these men in the one room in Ahmedabad, 40 men, didn't have access to water or toilets or anything for hand washing. In rural areas in Jharkhand, again, I haven't written it up, but we had the data that some of the youth were actually recommending aloe vera and other kinds of traditional things because there was no water to keep hand washing. So I think, how people also innovate. And I think what has been the impact of water scarcity on men, I think the story from Vipin was very interesting, that men tend to stay out. They don't really want to confront the problems at home. And therefore they do their eating and their bathing in the sea or whatever it is and just stay out of the home. But I think that also is likely to have implications for gender relations. I think you referred, Indu, and as Sainath said, you probably have a lot more data to domestic abuse, for instance. And we know that in the case of food security and food scarcity, there's rising domestic abuse because the UN Population Fund has just predicted for Africa that with climate change, by 2050, domestic intimate partner violence is going to increase by 40%. Is the UNFPA predictions in a report released in October. For India, we don't have any, or we don't know what is going to be the case. No, it's very hidden. So I think that maybe we should also, as we build on some of this work, really look at the relational changes, the changes on women, of course, but also indirectly, are there changes on effects on men, whether due to migration or whether due to stress, that they are leaving homes? What is the impact of that? Is it increasing HIV? Is it increasing domestic abuse? Is it increasing marriage breakup? I don't know. I was told that from Orissa to Kerala, a lot of the migrant men end up, then either having another partner or another family or whatever. So you don't know what is going to be the larger implication on society and also on women's and children's lives. So I think in the future, I would think that when we are looking at gender, of course, the issue of women and its impact is so critical, given the invisibility of work, but also looking at indirect impacts because of either male presence or absence, either way. Male presence and increasing stress and abuse, or male absence and disengagement from the home, and a result of that. I think the story on menstruation was shocking actually, from Odisha. This government claims that, we have done very well on defecation-free ODF, and poor James of IIPS lost his job because of the NFHS report. But the claim is that, every Jal Jeevan Abhiyan, that everybody has water. UNICEF has been running schools and water, and the fact to see that, still girls and women have to go like you said, I won't repeat, but I found that really quite a shocking experience. I hadn't realized that. And I think finally, just to reiterate the point that has been made by Sainath, that I think ultimately justice or social justice is something we need to talk about. No, it just doesn't come by giving 1,000 rupees, 2,000 rupees. Now every state and state before elections is offering some 1,000, 2,000 rupees to women to get their vote. And that is not changing the everyday difficulties and the structural difficulties that they are facing. They cannot, for 1,000 rupees they cannot buy the water. It will not save them standing overnight in that queue, even if they have that 1,000 rupees. So I think really in terms of, we have to keep, and I would really encourage all three of you, but also other journalists with whom we have been in touch, and of course Pari does an excellent job of this, but to really carry on, pointing to these everyday lived experiences. If we have to move towards justice, just trying to buy off women by giving them 1,000, 2,000 rupees, I see it as a bribe. It's not even enough income. If you really wanted to recognize their domestic work, then pay them the fair wages for domestic work. If we have a domestic worker at home, we pay her 10 to 15,000 rupees a month. So then pay that woman like that. But paying this 1,000, 2,000 rupees, I think is really, neither here nor there. It is not recognizing the value of the domestic work they do. It is not really allowing them to use that money to replace some of this drudgery, or to purchase water, or to have a better house or whatever. So I think we really need to keep highlighting that we need to recognize these issues, and we need a proper resource distribution, in terms of schemes, in terms of policies. This kind of dole thing has a purpose in emergencies and for the very marginalized, but it does not solve our systemic issues which can ultimately lead to justice. So thank you again very much. This has been a wonderful session. Thanks for organizing, Ranga and Gopi, and to all the media fellows.
Thank you, Professor Nitya. I mean, while we commit ourselves to creating this alternate narratives from the media fellows on the issues discussed over the years, I think we've made small steps. So one of the initiatives that we've started is to come out with policy briefs that summarizes the findings of our media fellows. So that will be uploaded soon on our website, and we'll be happy to share with all of you.
So how has rural journalism changed in India over the last 2 decades? And do you think the mainstream media is doing justice to rural reporting, sir?
It's changed for the better, it's changed for the worse in many cases. See, the last figures we have on rural India in the media come from the Center for Media Studies, Delhi. The oldest media monitoring organization in India, more than 30, maybe 35 years old now. And a 5-year average shows us that the front page of national dailies, on average, the front page of national dailies assign 0.67% of their editorial space to news of rural origin. 67% of that space is to news of New Delhi origin. So when you say 0.67%, you're saying 0.67% for 69% of the population. When you move to the inside pages, all the social sector beats, education, health, welfare, all these cumulatively account for less editorial space than crime and entertainment. So firstly, I have long ago stopped using the word mainstream media. I don't see how we can call something mainstream that excludes 85% of the population. Because they also exclude the working class, the unions, the working women of the cities as well. I would more correctly call it corporate media, because the process since the 1980s, Indian media has three phases. One is, it's 200 years old as of 2022. From 1822 to 2022 was 200 years. 160 or 150 of those years are something to be proud of, where the media or the press spoke for the voiceless, rightly, wrongly, whatever, but they were committed to that. Post-independence, a lot of the media, Indian press was the child of the freedom struggle, and most of those papers were started by freedom fighters. They collapsed financially after independence and are bought over by business houses. The second phase begins. From 1980s, it's what you see is called the corporatization of the media, and I call them corporate media, because that's who they are. If we are going to analyze them in terms of our expectations of fourth pillar of, Indian democracy or fourth estate, I think you are going to be very disappointed. That's not what they are there to do. Yeah, you can force them under circumstances, as the public does, as the farmer struggle did, to pay some heed to these issues. But that's not what they're there for. They're there to make profit. They are corporations and have to be analyzed in that framework and that light. So when you have this problem, you're really looking at what is a business, a super heavy business. Just to give you an idea, only the listed media companies alone, their value as of April 2024, according to Ernst & Young, was something like 2.32 trillion rupees, and it went up by more than 25% when you had the Ambani Disney Hotstar merger. Yeah, giving 40% of control of all media to one individual, and 60% of all streaming in this country to one entity. So yeah, I think the signs in the mainstream media or corporate media are not good. I think that the public action can force them to change to an extent, but within limits. So what are the, I think that there is also a healthy fighting spirit, independent media, which has, the trouble with that is they are financially extremely insecure, and they are, many of them have collapsed in the last 20 years. I'm very proud of the fact that Pari has survived 10 years. Yeah, we don't get government funds, we don't take direct corporate funds, anything else. So no direct, things which make us dependent, where someone can pull the plug and we collapse. But we are always on the edge of collapse because of the financial things. So if you want to create improvements, please back those other media. I'm not telling you to not read your newspapers. I read 3 newspapers from the mainstream every morning. But please read others and back them. Give them that backing. The Wires, the Strolls, the Paris, or, Frontline, which completed 40 years. Give them that backing. Put your money where your mouth is, and you will make a much more important difference. Thank you.
May I please request Professor Nitya Rao and Aparna to release the policy brief. It's a draft, but we'd like you to release and hopefully read it and share your comments so that we can finalize it. Can we? So we'd also like to share the draft with you later today, and we'd like to hear from you on, your comments and your suggestions on it. So I think we're nearing the end of today's event. On behalf of the organizing team, I'd like to extend my heartfelt thanks to everyone who's joined online and in person in celebrating the stories from the field brought out by the Mina Swaminathan Media Fellows 2024 on the theme Water as a Gendered Issue in India. The fellowship, as Dr. Ranga had mentioned in the outset, was instituted in 2020 to honor the spirit of Mina Swaminathan's contribution to the field of gender and development, and for her commitment towards building the foundation as a gender inclusive organization. So I would first like to congratulate the media fellows Indu Gunashekar, Shafiq Tamrasheri and Shatropa Samantaraya for your gender sensitive reporting on water insecurities that rarely gain the attention from the corporate media, as P. Sainath just mentioned. I think you've brought out the stories that were both of people who are both silenced and invisibilized. But also more importantly, you've troubled the authorities, nudged them to take action. So that's great, and congratulations for doing that. I'd like to thank our expert commentators, P. Sainath, Aparna. Thank you for being here, and Professor Nitya Rao for sharing your comments and also giving us ideas on how to take this forward in the coming years. Last but not the least, I'd like to thank colleagues Dr. Rangalakshmi, Gopinath, Uma, Surya, Kanappan for working really hard to bring this event to fruition. And last but not the least, I'd like to thank Dr. Soumya Swaminathan for always being so encouraging for anything that we propose to do in the foundation. So thank you very much, and until next year, we'll see you with a new set of stories from our media fellows. Thank you.